You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm your host Robin, and today I'm here with a mega update on the Moscow, Idaho homicides. If you're wondering why I've been quiet over the last week and a half or so and haven't posted an arrest update episode since the arrest, considering I covered it so closely as it was happening, it's because I wanted to wait until more facts were made available rather than just jumping in, adding to the mass hysterics of the case and all of the media, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all of the content. Every single time one fact is made public, it seems like there is an individual episode or video on it. So I just kind of wanted to sit back a little bit, let some stuff add up, and then put out one singular episode. Strap in, because this is going to be a long one. By the time I'm finished, I may even cut it into 2 pieces. Who knows? But we're going to cover as much as possible, everything that we know, and it is a lot. Also, after the Moscow updates, I would like to cover the Lori Vallow case. There's been a little movement here and there on the Chad Daybell side, but Lori Vallow came out and dropped a bombshell this last week. So obviously, I haven't covered that case in quite a while, but this is worthy of a discussion. So we're going to talk about that at the end. Before we get into it, housekeeping. Again, you're listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. The website is WeSawTheDevil.com, and from there you can find all of our socials, as well as a link to the Patreon. And to our current patrons, you are not charged for January, and you will not be charged for the next 3 months as soon as things get back into shape, but suspended until further notice, shall I say. If you don't follow the show on Instagram in particular, please do so. I'm going to be posting Lori Vallow and Moscow updates there as well, especially when they don't really warrant a full singular episode. You know, sometimes there's just something really crazy or something that you want to discuss, and I'll sit here and be like, oh my God, I really need to make an episode about this. And then I'm like, well, that would only be 5 minutes of content. Can't really do that. So I figure, hey, why not post it on Instagram and social media in lieu of that? And since these are very active cases, don't forget the Lori Vallow trial is coming up here soon, and it may or may not happen now. We'll get to that in a moment, guys. But yeah, so if you're not following on social media, particularly Instagram, please go over and give us a follow. We're under We Saw the Devil podcast. And finally, if you are enjoying the show, please take just 1 second out of your day to leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're currently listening and using to listen. Reviews not only help creators like myself make the product better, but it helps with things like sponsors and other administrative stuff. I do listen and accept feedback and take feedback when you guys send us emails, which, by the way, info@WeSawTheDevil.com. If you have a suggestion, case request, complaint too. I love constructive criticism, and I do try to take that to heart to make the show better and more enjoyable for you. But I think that about covers housekeeping, so let's get right into it. I haven't put out an episode since Bryan Kohberger was arrested. And guys, let's just sit for a second and revel in that. This was a case I was fearful of becoming like the Delphi murders, cold for several years until something actually happened. Happy to report that is not the case. Apparently, we were all fooled. The Moscow Police Department did a damn fine job of keeping the information that they had close to the vest, and then coming out, they had this asshole on the radar pretty quickly from the beginning based on a variety of factors, which we will cover. So I'm sure all of you are aware, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger was arrested last month at the very end on the 30th, named as the alleged perpetrator of the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and Madison Mogen. Now, we've all been following this case for more than a month, since probably mid to late November, hanging on every single detail, theory, and press conference. I've complained at length about how wild the true crime community has been since this case hit the national circuit. In the last episode, I discussed the TikToker who randomly, blindly blamed a female professor at the college, claiming that she had a sexual relationship with one of the victims. It's been appalling. It's kind of, if you remember the Gabby Petito case and how everyone and their mother's cousin's dog had some sort of horrible, ridiculous theory to contribute to society, this was that, but on steroids. And yeah, it has been a wild ride. I remember waking up on Friday, December 30th. I was half asleep, as I do when I wake up for work, and I had basically the week off that week. I grabbed my phone, I was half asleep, and I had like 4 Facebook Messenger notifications and a couple Instagram messages. And I was like, what the hell? What's going on? Is the world ending? Something happened? People are mighty social today. But then I saw the New York Times headline that a suspect had been arrested, and I just immediately shot up out of bed so I could use my laptop. And I saw the name, Bryan Kohberger. I searched for him on Twitter as a hashtag because that was trending immediately. I had to know what he looked like. I had to put a face to this name, this monster that committed this crime. And finally, the website Heavy, who any sort of tragedy, murder, mass shooting, anything like that, the website Heavy typically does a 5 things you need to know article on the perpetrator or the case. And I saw his face for the first time. I mean, it was chilling, finally assigning a face to someone who committed arguably one of the most sensationalized and brutal crimes of the last few years. And I immediately looked for when the official press conference was going to be held, which was held later that afternoon. So again, essentially, this episode is going to be basically just us going through the case chronologically post-arrest. The information as it was basically made public and available in chronological order. I think that's going to be the easiest way to discuss this case because there's so much to cover. And I haven't had an episode on it since about 2 weeks now. So let's just kind of start from A to Z. So 3 p.m., Chief Fry of the Moscow Police Department came out later that afternoon for his press conference. And I think a lot of us who follow or are interested in true crime and criminal justice as a whole know how these typically play out. If you recall East Area Rapists, I can rattle off a handful of others. A suspect is named, a basic outline of the murder/crime is given, and then law enforcement typically does kind of a victory lap. They thank other agencies who assisted them in the investigation. Sometimes the prosecutor will speak. And this one largely was no different. However, Chief Fry actually did come out and gave more or less the details of the investigation. He named Bryan Kohberger, said that he was arrested at a home in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He lives in an apartment in Pullman, Washington, and is a graduate student there at Washington State University. Now, due to Idaho state law, his capability and Idaho law enforcement's capability to provide information is very, very limited. They can provide, at that point, they could provide more once he was in Idaho and appeared in court. Because Bryan Kohberger at that point was in, again, Pennsylvania. He was arrested where we now know was his parents' residence. He said that law enforcement had received 19,000 tips and did more than 300 interviews. And that's just insane to me. This case, and what I particularly worried about, myself, is that there was so much digital evidence as far as the cameras. That's kind of what I actually focused on in the early episodes, is the cameras, the CCTV footage. Were the police actually, going out and getting it? And boy, did they ever. They were on top of it, as all of, us idiots were over here, kind of bitching about it. Although I definitely try to give them as much credit. And I've said repeatedly, we don't know the information that they're working with, and they could be putting out information or just enough information or even false information, for the sake of the investigation. But yeah, they have done a lot of legwork. Kudos to the Moscow Police Department for not showing their hand. They actually did a really incredible job. Interestingly enough, something that has kind of been had a question mark stamped by it was when Ethan and Xana arrived back home at the residence. A lot of people focused on the Sigma Chi party that they attended the evening until the early morning of the murders. Well, Chief Fry did come out and say that they did, in fact, arrive back home at the residence at 1:45 a.m. The two surviving roommates got home at about 1 a.m., and Madison and Kaylee got there not long thereafter. The morning of November 13th, a 911 call was made at 11:58 a.m. reporting an unconscious person. The call came from inside the home from one of the surviving roommates' cell phones. Moscow police responded and found the 4 victims on the 2nd and 3rd floors. On November 17th, autopsies were performed confirming identities and causes. Homicide by stabbing, as well as edged weapon. Some had defensive wounds, and each had been stabbed multiple times. As is usually the case, he acknowledged that the work, quote, "the work is not done, it's just started." And he acknowledged that the Moscow Police Department had been questioned and more or less railed on because of the lack of details that they had released to the public. Chief Fry explained that releasing details might have impeded the investigation or alerted the suspect. And I highly think it's probable that it's actually the latter one of those two, alerted the suspect, whom we now know was following this insanely closely. After Chief Fry spoke for a few minutes, Bill Thompson, the county prosecutor, came to the podium with more information. If you recall him, he is the more lean, Santa-looking gentleman who kind of got into trouble early on in the investigation when he kept making public statements. He would make a statement, and then the Moscow police would walk it back. So he came and he said that Idaho charges would be 4 counts of first-degree murder involving felony burglary. Of course, we were all wondering about that probable cause affidavit. On that date, he did say that it was going to be sealed until Bryan Kohberger came back to Idaho, and then it should be unsealed. In Pennsylvania, he was being held without bond, and then he actually had a court appearance scheduled for this past Tuesday in Monroe County. Then a public defender had also been appointed. Bryan's options were he could waive extradition to return voluntarily to Idaho or not waive, and then Idaho would proceed, that entire process. Thompson basically kind of went through the early process of what to expect once Bryan arrived in Idaho. He would make the initial appearance. They would make sure that he had competent counsel that was assigned to him, and then the court record would be made available. And this is also really interesting, too. They asked if anyone knows Kohberger to come forward, contact law enforcement, and let them know. Anything, they said, any bit of information, any tips, anything, even if you think it won't amount to anything or if it's unimportant, to please contact law enforcement if you know Bryan. After that, Kedrick Wills of the Idaho State Police then took the podium. He said that Kohberger lived 10 miles and 15 minutes away from Moscow. He said that he had an undergraduate degree in criminology, a master's degree in criminology, and was also in his first semester as a PhD candidate in criminology, criminal justice. He also thanked other coordinating agencies like the FBI, state police, etc. Now, Chief Fry then came back to answer some follow-up questions, and he didn't really answer any questions at all, such as how many tips did you receive for Kohberger in general? Did he ask if someone else had been arrested, which is one of the big first things after the news hit the media? Someone said that he asked the FBI, has anyone else been arrested? They asked how far into the investigation was it that you began to focus on him? What is his motive? He did not answer 99.9% of the questions. An interesting tidbit is also on December 30th, that was planned remediation of the home, basically where they remove harmful hazardous chemicals, the items in the home. They clean up the crime scene more or less and get it cleaned up, ready to go back to the property management company that owned the home. They actually stopped. The remediation was actually called off. Law enforcement was doing it, cleaning it out, so it could be turned back over, and they ceased. They were told to stop. Chief Fry did actually acknowledge that. And he said that it came via a legal request from the court, which we later found out came from Kohberger's attorney. Asked whether he stands behind his handling of the case, Chief Fry 100% doubled down and said that he still stands behind the investigation and keeping the information that he held private. Makes perfect sense because they did a hell of a job here. He did acknowledge that they are still looking for the weapon, but they did find the Hyundai Elantra, which we now also know was Bryan's car. We'll get into that in a moment. And that it was at his parents' residence in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Police ended up finding him via genetic genealogy, and then they tracked him as he drove across the country to Pennsylvania. He also gave a shout out to Orion, the operational response and investigative online network. Orion basically gives the FBI and its partners kind of a real-time online network to really quickly coordinate efforts in crisis situations, and it can go across agencies. Doesn't matter how many different personnel, how many different agencies are involved, where they might go, it allows them to closely coordinate. So that clearly was a very big group effort, probably the road trip across the country, which we'll get into. It was actually a very short yet concise press conference, and it seemed like we would have to wait for a probable cause affidavit to be released once Kohberger made it back to Idaho. Well, the wheels of social media, this is where journalists and armchair sleuths alike got busy. I think it's safe to say that the motive is the top thing that people were trying to understand. And that's natural. That's normal for people, especially in horrible situations like these, to want to understand, why did this man do this? We have to somehow reconcile the fact that this man decided to viciously and brutally end the lives of 4 young students. Why? For what purpose? And as is always the case when something like this happens, people who knew the suspect at any point in their or his life, they all come forward out of the woodwork. Friends, sometimes extended family members. We learned very quickly, I believe by the end of day 1, that Bryan is a very hard-line vegan. He apparently went to a family member's house for a holiday and required that they buy all new pots and pans so that his meal could be cooked on something that had never touched meat before. This, of course, got people wondering about the connection to students. So day 1, people were discussing and Googling, if you Google vegan restaurants in Moscow, Idaho, the Mad Greek comes up as the number 1 option. Maddie and Xana both worked there. It's safe to say that that was a top theory the afternoon of the press conference, that he could have met them when he came into Moscow. He hit on one of the 2 girls. They shot him down, and then he decided to stalk and quote unquote get his revenge. That happened very, very quickly. Later that evening, it was shared on CBS's 48 Hours that the FBI had actually tracked the Elantra by Easy Pass, aircraft, and ground support in mid-December on his and his father's drive across the country back to his home. Now, a lot of people immediately, and this is something that I absolutely detest about the true crime community. Of course, everyone was like, well, the dad's in on it. The dad came to cover for him and provide help for his murderous son. Obviously, that is likely not the case. Otherwise, his father would most likely be arrested. However, that was a pre-planned trip for Bryan's father, who flew into Seattle and was then there to drive across the country with Bryan back to Pennsylvania for the holidays. And that's actually a very normal thing. I know that Bryan is male, but that is a very long road trip. And, sometimes it just sucks to drive across the country by yourself. I have flown out and driven with friends who didn't want to be alone. My own parents, when I went to college, flew out and drove back home with me. Not that weird to me. Day 2 after the arrest, they were pulled over twice in Indiana. It came out almost back to back, once for speeding and then again for following the vehicle in front of him too closely. And everyone knew, we all knew, this is not random. This is not just some magical coincidence. A couple days later, police would actually go ahead and release a chest cam footage of one of the encounters. And that was pretty interesting in its own right, because you can see when the police officer walks up to the car, Bryan's face, he's terrified. I mean, you can see the worry on his face. His father does 90% of the talking, and weirdly enough, brings up a weird SWAT situation at WSU for whatever reason. Yeah, this happened, this morning when we left. I mean, it was really, really bizarre. His father is odd. I will give everyone that. But, at first we thought that they were just monitored as they drove. But then we learned that literally half of U.S. law enforcement, okay, that might be an exaggeration, but many law enforcement personnel were keeping an eye on them as they made their way to Pennsylvania. They wanted to get a piece of trash or something with Bryan's DNA on it so they could match it to what I assume would be the sample at the scene, most likely on that tan knife sheath. Apparently, Bryan wore surgical gloves when he entered gas stations or grocery stores. Now, a lot of people are saying that that's Bryan, him using his criminology mind to basically be like, no one's getting DNA off of me. If he is a big germaphobe, or, we are seeing a rise in COVID and RSV, it could also have been for that purpose. I've done 2 cross-country drives in the last, since the pandemic started. And let me tell you, I have my freaking gloves on when I get gas. In terms of the grocery store, don't have an answer, but it was noted that it was very strange that he did wear surgical gloves even into grocery stores and while getting gas. Then the Daily Mail, whom I have such a love-hate relationship with the Daily Mail. I love trash. Again, I've said it a million times. I love shows like 90 Day Fiancé. Britain, in particular, has a lot of really trashy gems. Like, I just started this show called Holy Orders, basically about a bunch of like party girls who sleep around and party and drink a lot, and then they decide that they need a change, so then they put them in a convent for a month. It makes for wonderful reality TV. But the Daily Mail is kind of similar to that. It does have some little nuggets of information, little nuggets of truth hiding here and there, but it's a shit publication overall. If you recall, the day of his arrest, the Daily Mail published an article stating that another inmate, they had interviewed another inmate at the Pennsylvania jail that he was in, and that he was basically threatening to kill people and going apeshit. And yeah, that didn't happen. That inmate saw a different inmate acting that way and said it was Bryan, and then got their 15 minutes of fame, I guess. But that never happened. So I take everything that the Daily Mail says with a grain of salt, but this has in fact been verified. So they published an article that said that FBI agents, during a stakeout after Bryan arrived at his parents' home, that they witnessed him cleaning out his car, like scrubbing it, meticulously scrubbing that white Elantra inside and out. He was wearing gloves, latex gloves, and then he took the trash and then dumped it in his neighbor's trash can, all in full view of the FBI, all while the FBI was watching him. So I'm assuming that they likely got their DNA sample probably out of that trash can somehow. But that being said, very, 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 very suspicious behavior. And I think it's worth mentioning another theory that people have, which I think could definitely have some bite to it, in terms of why Bryan's father came to WSU, flew into Seattle, picked him up, and they drove cross country together, is that Bryan probably didn't want his white Elantra sitting in his apartment complex parking lot, knowing at that time, mid to late November, that the police had basically more or less put out an APB on it, a BOLO. Probably didn't want that car sitting there in case there was DNA evidence or anything like that, which we don't know, but I can only imagine after killing 4 people in such a short amount of time, you probably have some DNA transfer going on. And then in something that I can only refer to as sweet, sweet, sweet poetic justice, Bryan Kohberger was arrested on December 30th at roughly 3 a.m. with approximately 50 different law enforcement officers on the scene. If you've seen the pictures, they left broken glass on the front door as well as the side windows. So in the first 48 hours, we learned a lot, not only just from the FBI and law enforcement, but also from people who went to school with Bryan. We learned that he had a supposed heroin problem when he was younger in high school, that he was overweight and eventually took up boxing and became good at boxing, but that he became a really bad bully and bullied his original friends group too, became aggressive. So just to recap the facts that we immediately learned about him, that he was from Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Obviously, he was 28 years old. His birthday is November 21st, 1994. He was a PhD, a candidate from Washington State University, also a teaching assistant, teacher's aide, whom it's a couple former students have come out and described having him as their teaching assistant, and that's really fascinating as well. Regarding his family, his sister is a registered behavior technician as well as a counselor, one of his sisters. His dad works in HVAC. He and his mother have filed for bankruptcy multiple times, so they've clearly had some financial issues throughout the years. And he hasn't really been arrested before. He had apparently it's a criminal infraction to not wear a seatbelt, but it clearly did not keep him from being a security guard or working in teaching. Again, the Moscow press conference regarding the arrest was on Friday. He had that court appearance Tuesday morning. It felt like it took forever to happen because we were all wondering. Kohberger apparently stated that he was eager to basically prove his own innocence. So considering how much evidence we now know the police and law enforcement have against him, good luck, sir. But at that Tuesday hearing, he did in fact waive his right to an extradition hearing. So he pretty much immediately was transported to Idaho via plane. And while we waited for the hearing to take place in Idaho, additional information, of course, came out. ABC News, an article said, quote, law enforcement sources told ABC News that police identified Kohberger as a suspect, at least in part, by using DNA technology, and then police tracked the grad student to Pennsylvania through his car. They have to have somewhat of an airtight case on him if they got him charged with 4 counts of murder, but also by bringing in so many different personnel from so many different agencies on this for a cross-country road trip. I mean, they literally followed him via land, air, and sea pretty much back to Pennsylvania on this. And DNA technology. So we know now that the DNA that they collected was on that tan knife sheath found in, I believe it was Madison's bed. Kaylee and Madison were in the bedroom. It was found beside Kaylee. So law enforcement retrieved the DNA, took a swab, whatever, and they ran it through the law enforcement databases. Has this person ever been arrested before? Do we have any history of them? No. Now they have the ability to run samples through private genealogical companies' databases to see if, hey, is this person, have they taken a test? Do they have a close family member that has taken a test? They are able then to use a variety of different records, as well as genealogists themselves, to construct a family tree. So basically, law enforcement will then go down the family tree, eliminate those who don't live in the area, who don't fit the profile, too old, women, female potentially, maybe they're too young, like a child. And then they take it to a list and they cross-reference against other data points, such as where does this person live? Is it a male? Are they in the right age range? In this case, do they have a white Elantra? We now know, and we'll talk about this in a moment too, that Washington State University actually pulled these student parking records and discovered that, in fact, there was a white Elantra registered to a Bryan Kohberger. But the genetic genealogy is really what made this case and made it happen so quickly. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. If you've been following the case of the East Area rapist, that happened as well. An extended family member of Joseph James DeAngelo ended up taking a test. It hit the system, and they were able to basically filter that out, find him as a suspect, look at his profile, kind of match. They needed proof, and they grabbed a piece of his trash, and boom, this masked monster who terrorized Sacramento area for decades, was finally arrested. And I think that's awesome. I think that technology and the way that that has advanced so much that, I mean, let's face it, how many of you listening right now have taken a 23andMe test? How many of you have taken Ancestry.com? Speaking for myself, when I turned 21, I'm adopted. I was adopted as a baby. So I wanted to know, when I turned 21, my partner at the time gave me a DNA kit. Took it first through 23andMe. Then I also took Ancestry.com. And one of law enforcement's top tools that they use is a site called GED Match, which, I mean, you can really dig deep into DNA on that one. But for armchair basic users like myself, it'll give you additional matches and do a better job of showing you which side that match lies on. That is the tool that they, in fact, use for Bryan Kohberger, one of them. And I think that's amazing, but I really do feel like laws need to be made to regulate this very strictly, might I add, because every single time I hear of a case where genetic genealogy played a hand in apprehending serial killer or murderer or serial rapist, something like that, my first thought is, yay, they got him. But then I think about how relatively new this entire area is and how it's not really monitored that much. I mean, think about it. Let's just say your test, and if you've taken 23andMe test, you know that they now have health tests. I mean, God, there are dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of websites where you can upload your DNA, the results from your DNA tests, and it will pop out health reports. Yeah, you're predisposed to this random degenerative eye disease. You're, say, predisposed to diabetes, cancer, things like that. In the wrong hands, that could be utilized by healthcare companies to raise deductibles, raise rates, or keep you from having health insurance. Thinking of a future where, God forbid, you find out that you have cancer and, your DNA test says that you're predisposed to it. So then you're denied cancer treatment. I know that sounds a little sci-fi, off the bat here, but that is a reality and that is a possibility, because if there's one thing about American culture, and I mean, a lot of cultures, is capitalism is king. So any tool that can be utilized to further the bottom line, further revenue, or save money, is going to be used that way. And so super, super, super happy that they were able to snag Kohberger, partly due to genetic genealogy, but just wanted to, kind of flag that of, as amazing as it is, I think in its current state, it is also a little terrifying. On January 1st, Bryan Kohberger's family released a statement through the Monroe County Public Defender. It said, quote, "First and foremost, we care deeply for the 4 families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we will love and support our son and brother. We have fully cooperated with law enforcement agencies in an attempt to seek the truth and promote his presumption of innocence rather than judge unknown facts and make erroneous assumptions. We respect privacy in this matter as our family and the family suffering loss can move forward through the legal process." And a lot of people, Bryan Kohberger's mother was a teaching assistant, and a handful of people have come forward and spoken about how she is the absolute sweetest, most kind individual that they have ever met. And I hate cases like these, and I feel so bad for families in cases like these. Not like the Gabby Petito case, Brian Laundrie's family, just fuck them. Very, very clear that his family knew about Gabby's murder, knew that their son killed her, and attempted to either throw law enforcement. Well, they did. I mean, there's no answer buts about it. They attempted to throw law enforcement off and give Brian a head start out. And they never actually told the truth. But I don't believe that Bryan Kohberger's family is involved in this in any way. It makes you really feel for them. I mean, imagine if your child one day, all of a sudden the FBI raid knocked down your door, pulled even though he's 28, he's still their child, out of bed. And suddenly your son's face is on the cover of newspapers worldwide that he is basically the new Ted Bundy. Not saying that he is Ted Bundy, but I'm just saying that that is how people are speaking of him and how his crimes are very reminiscent of Ted Bundy killing the co-eds. It's just really sad, and they are also victims in this. I'm sure his family they're going through their memory Rolodex of whatever he was weird or off, or did they parent him incorrectly, not encourage the right things. I'm sure his family has a lot of different things going on in their kind of internal dialogue between them right now. And it's really sad. And knowing that these armchair sleuths from the true crime community are now doxing them, getting as much information as they can about them. A lot more information is available surrounding his sisters as well as his parents. But honestly, it is irrelevant at this moment to the case of Bryan Kohberger. So I'm not going to feed into that by going off of unsubstantiated rumors or what some bored person, how they spent their afternoon researching and Googling to dox these poor people. But yeah, just want to make that very clear. It's irrelevant at this point right now. So we're not going to go off of the harassment, frankly. So as I said, Bryan was sent back to Idaho. He had his initial hearing there, and then the probable cause affidavit was released. Now, I'm not going to go page by page through the probable cause affidavit There are plenty of actual criminal defense attorneys who have gone page by page, word for word, and read into it, analyzed it. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just talk about a few key takeaways here and questions that I have and just pieces of information that I want to bring up. Let's just go ahead and tackle the most obvious one. And this one, actually, I hate to say it, it's cliche in the true crime world, but it gave me full body chills. Legit, it terrified me. And that's that Dylan, the roommate, actually saw him. Now, shockingly enough, as we've been following this case, believe that the two surviving roommates were on the first floor. A lot of speculation was based around that. Maybe he came in through the second floor, attacked the second and third floors, killed the four kids, and had no idea that there were roommates on the first floor. The probable cause affidavit apparently showed that Dylan, one of the surviving roommates, was on the second floor, not far from Xana Kernodle's bedroom, where Ethan Chapin was visiting and spending the night. She was asleep in her bed, and she heard noises that woke her up. She said that she assumed that it was Maddie playing with her dog. Shortly thereafter, she said that she heard crying. She told police, rather, that she heard crying, and then a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She then apparently, now, it's not exactly documented as far as how this happened, which actually leads to a lot of additional questions. But she apparently opened her door to her bedroom and saw a, quote, figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. She described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past Dylan, DM in the affidavit, as she stood in, quote, frozen shock. The male walked towards the back sliding glass door. DM locked herself in her room after seeing the male. Now, this is probably, if anything happened in that affidavit, if anything was written in that affidavit, this is what has basically consumed social media and the internet since the PCA's release. And I understand why. Because Dylan, DM, don't forget there's two surviving roommates. The roommate on the first floor slept through everything. She had no idea, apparently, anything had taken place that evening. We found out that Dylan's room almost bordered Xana's, as well as she was woken up in the middle of the night thinking that Kaylee was playing with her dog. Then she heard crying, as well as a man's voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She opened her door. It's unknown if she was standing in the hallway or peeking through her door, but she saw a man, bushy eyebrows, dressed in black, in a mask, who walked by her and out towards the sliding door. The call to police, the 911 call later that morning that came in almost at noon, was made 8 hours, almost 8 full hours after Dylan had that experience. So, of course, the entirety of the internet is trying to dox her, blaming her for these deaths, saying that she had to have had something to do with it. And it is just disgusting, revolting. I just question how people were raised at this point, because for people so obsessed with true crime, especially the psychological aspect of it, who watch 48 Hours, Dateline, live for shows like these, you have to know that there is a level of trauma response here. Imagine you're in her position. You go out with friends to a bar, you have some drinks, you come home around 1 a.m., you're asleep in bed, and you have a roommate who has a dog upstairs who frequently plays with said dog. And you hear banging and noises, leading you to be like, okay, well, she's playing with her dog mighty late, but that sucks. I live in a house with 3 other roommates. So 4, technically, I guess, with Ethan there frequently. Kind of sucks and kind of noisy. I'm going to go back to bed. Then you hear crying. It's okay, I'm going to help you. You're asleep. You're groggy. You open your door. You see a masked man. You're not quite sure if he's a visitor, if he's just a rando. You have no idea who he is. People are constantly in and out of your house because your house has been kind of the, quote, party house, as it were. So you just lock your door and go back to bed. Now, that is a possibility. Another possibility, and this has been seen in countless cases, your mind will do somersaults to protect you. The most recent good example of this, although I've seen this play out in many, 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 many true crime documentaries, is someone stumbles across the scene. Let's say it's brutal, it's bloody, it's gory, or they just sense that something's not right. Maybe they heard some commotion next door, same thing in an apartment building, but they kind of put it out of their mind. Surely that can't be happening. They have traumatic experience, and they see something they really shouldn't have. No person should see. The brain is an amazing thing, and sometimes it will kick into self-preservation mode. Most recently, I saw an interview with a woman who lived, again, same setup, lived with multiple roommates, and one of her roommates was brutally, brutally attacked in the middle of the night, raped, and beaten almost to death. Except she had no idea that she'd been beaten. She actually came into the bedroom and saw liquid on the floor and thought, oh my gosh, she may have choked on her own vomit and died. So she called the police. She called an ambulance. She said that she didn't realize, because when the ambulance came, the EMTs came in, and she was right behind him, showing them where to go. And he said, oh my God, look at all the blood. And she said in that instance, her brain flipped a switch, and suddenly she could see the blood everywhere. Apparently it was like on the ceiling, on the walls, on the furniture, and the carpet, and the bed. It was everywhere. And she said suddenly it was like a flip switch in full color that, oh wow, that's not just a little vomit that I saw on the floor. This is all blood. And she could have seen that first and foremost, but her brain, trying to go into, again, self-preservation mode and protection mode, actually shut that off. And she was looking at it directly, but wasn't seeing it. It is very possible that Dylan knew, kind of inherently, subconsciously, that something was very, 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 very wrong. She could have seen something. Again, the police have been very, very, very tight-lipped in this case, and probable cause affidavits are only meant to give a bare minimum of information, basically just justifying the arrest and the charges. So I do have a feeling that we are probably going to find out exactly what happened and exactly the full scope of her experience here. But the experience that's laid out in the probable cause affidavit is not suspicious to me at all. In fact, I mean, if you take a variety of factors of why she waited 8 full hours to call 911, maybe she was intoxicated, hungover, woke up in the middle of the night. Maybe she was groggy. It was a known party house. I know many, many, many people. And again, I'm not speculating here. I'm not saying this is fact. I'm saying my own experience too in college. Maybe there were drugs in the house, cannabis, marijuana, cocaine, whatever it may be. There could have been drugs in the house. A lot of party houses I've been to, they usually have a couple things, and calling the police is kind of a no-no. Maybe she didn't expect that scene had just taken place in the apartment. And my God, guys, she saw a masked man walking towards her. I don't know how much more terrifying that can get. When I talked about it in the last episode, but when a man was trying to break into my house, he never gained entry, but it's when my parents alerted me. I went into the room, flipped open the light, and there was a man staring at me from the outside in my window. He had been trying to jimmy the window open. I froze for a second. Like, I actually froze. I saw him slowly back away from the window, but I just stood there staring at the window, completely in shock. I can't imagine what my response would have been in real time had I, say, gone down the hallway, opened my door, and he was standing in the house. Like, we don't know how we would respond in instances like these unless we actually go through it. And I'm willing to bet that 99.999% of you Billy and Betty badasses who are like, I would have called the police immediately. I would have sobered up immediately, and I would have gotten the law enforcement right there immediately. You wouldn't have. Chances are, you probably wouldn't have. And who knows? No one knows. And so judging this young girl based on a trauma response and doxing her and harassing her, some of the stuff on social media I've seen is just beyond the pale. It's putrid about her. She will need therapy until the day that she dies, most likely. There's absolutely zero call for it. I don't even want to put this one out into the atmosphere or even bring public attention to it, frankly, but I just find it so disgusting. And I'm just like, Please don't do this and be this person. I'm also seeing people making public statements and railing against how she probably let them die, that Maddie and Kaylee and Ethan and Xana could have, one of them or more could have still been alive. And due to her actions, maybe they didn't get the medical attention that they needed, and therefore she killed them. That's vile. Let's not do that. That's something that we are not going to do, is put that energy out there and discuss that and add even more to the plate of a child. In my eyes, she's a child, more or less, a young woman, young woman, who's going to be suffering probably until her last breath because of this, because of the level of trauma. So that was one of the biggest questions in the probable cause affidavit, was why Dylan waited 8 hours to call police. And also that she saw him. Unknown whether he saw her. It could have been dark in the hallway. Who knows? She could have been peeping through the door. But she did, in fact, get a look and did say, she described Bryan Kohberger's build to a T, including his monkey brows that are very, very bushy. One thing that we did not get an answer to is who the target was. In the very earliest days of the investigation, authorities said that the attack was targeted. When asked if it was the home or a member of the household, they walked it back. So the affidavit gave absolutely zero details whatsoever, or even a connection. There was not even a connection stated in this affidavit of how Bryan Kohberger had, any sort of relationship or anything to the victims. So as it stands right now, we're going on January 11th now, and we have no idea. All we know is that he just lived about 15 minutes away from them, just over the Idaho-Washington border in Pullman, Washington, and he was in the PhD program. That's all that we know as far as a connection. Kaylee's father, Steve Gonsalves, who has been on Fox News nonstop, I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I empathize tremendously with the man's pain, but he kind of has needed to stop talking, and he largely has with the hiring of his new attorney. He did say after the arrest that he had found unnamed connections between Bryan Kohberger and his daughter, but he was not ready to reveal what those potential ties were. We don't know. There is a little air of uncertainty. Apparently there was talk that Kaylee Gonsalves had a stalker. I've seen law enforcement talk about it. I've seen Kaylee's father talk about it. And it's just kind of, no one knows whether it's actually true or not that she told her family and friends that she believed that she had a stalker. No one knows. What is known in terms of the stalking is that Bryan Kohberger's cell phone pinged in the area of the King Road home more than 12 times between June 23rd and November 13th when the murders happened. Just absolutely insane. So he very clearly, in the probable cause affidavit, really does a great job of painting the picture that he was surveilling and he was stalking this home. He was even pulled over by police for not wearing a seatbelt on August 21st, just 4 months before the murders. He was only a little over a mile, like a mile and a half away from their home, from the rental house on King Road. And he was pulled over for failing to wear a seatbelt at a traffic at an intersection. So it's just, and his cell phone on that particular day pinged around 10:30 to 11:35. He was there for almost an exact hour, pinging on that King Road cell tower in that area. Not only that, but his phone was actually returned to the scene. So between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m., just 5 hours after the murders took place, his phone actually pinged off that same King Road area cell tower, the tower that the cell phones would ping between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m., just hours after the killing. So he actually went back. Now, did he go back because he left a piece, he left his sheath there? I mean, the knife sheath is what you can, buckle a knife into and keep the knife. So he did not have that likely attached to his, say, pants or jeans or whatever. He was likely just holding it and then accidentally left it at the scene. Did he return to the scene to see the law enforcement response? Did he return to the scene to get the sheath, try to see if he could get in, get out? No one knows, but that is just terrifying that he actually returned to the scene when everybody was either asleep or deceased. I mean, not only the cell phone coverage, but hey, let's talk about the obvious here. Surveillance footage actually was drawn to a white sedan, later identified as that Hyundai Elantra. It was seen around the area on various CCTV footage and business cameras around the time that the murders took place. So that on by November 25th, the law enforcement had already been notified, put out the BOLO, APB on this particular vehicle. That's when Washington State University decided to do its own, search for students who drove that. And those became the two largest identifying pieces of the probable cause affidavit. Investigators very quickly found that white Elantra at WSU and then followed it all across the country to Pennsylvania. On January 3rd, the gag order came out, which basically means no one can talk about this case anymore. Law enforcement, really anyone, regarding evidence regarding the occurrences or transactions involved in this case, the character, credibility, or criminal record of a party, the performance or results of any examinations or tests, or refusal or failure of a party to submit to such tests or examinations, any opinion as to the merits of the case or the claims of the defense of a party, any other matter reasonably likely to interfere with the fair trial of this case, such as, but not limited to, the existence or contents of any confession, admission, or statement given by the defendant, the possibility of a plea to the guilt of the charged offense or a lesser offense, or any opinion to the defendant's guilt or innocence. Tight lips from here on out, guys. It's probably going to be a hot minute until we find out any additional details surrounding evidence, motive. They haven't found the murder weapon as of yet. Apparently, Chief Fry again did comment on that. Something else that I found pretty interesting that's been lightly discussed, but not really at the forefront of anything, is the fact that there were some very strange crimes committed against women in Pullman, Washington in October and November. I'm talking about the month before and the month of the eventual murders, where Bryan lived, more or less. One was like 3 blocks away from his apartment. In the first one on October 29th, this is from the police blotter, caller thinks someone is downstairs in her basement. Officer responded, no one found. November 4th, caller advising that the downstairs door is unlocked and the crawl space is open. Officer responded. November 6th, caller reporting that they left to get food, and when they came home, their front door was wide open and no one is answering. Officers responded. There's also a woman who's done a couple TikToks where she documents that she actually had her camera out as she was talking to police, of where she had luggage in her car. She came out to her car, spent the night, I believe, with a friend or something, came outside and her underwear was in the middle of the street, and there were boot prints, like footprints, all over the interior of her car, which had been rummaged through. Nothing was missing. So it wouldn't actually surprise me terribly much if we find out that he had some kind of like dry test runs here or there. Or honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if we find out that he's killed before. Can't say that obviously with certainty because, I mean, look at BTK. BTK, his first known kill was a family of 4, including 2 children. Obviously, this is well within the realm of possibility that this is the first time that he actually did decide to murder. But I would not be surprised if we find out that at some point that he has also committed either other murders or other crimes leading up to, in terms of behavior leading up to this. But we are approaching the 1 hour mark, guys, and I am not a fan of lengthy podcast episodes. You know, those 2 to 3 hour long ones. I find that they're a total pain in the ass in terms of trying to find where you left off if you had to, say, go to work, run an errand, something like that. So I like to split it up. So this is going to be part 1. I'm going to split it in, have a part 2, which will include more information that's come out, more questions that the affidavit didn't answer, more information about Bryan, more details that we found out about him, his background, such as teenage, online teenage posts, a Reddit post that he made seeking criminals, to give their reason for committing crimes, an emotional state. There's a lot still left to cover. So I'm going to stop it here for part 1. Part 2 will be releasing tomorrow. So back to back, you don't have to wait another week. And then also in part 2 is going to be the Lori Vallow update, which I Honestly, did not see coming at all. But thank you again for listening. Again, I know we've only covered a fraction of the case. Don't you worry, we're going to cover all of it in part 2. And yeah, thank you for listening. You've been listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. Don't forget to check us out at wesawthedevil.com or follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Again, particularly Instagram, because I am going to be posting a lot of updates there as they happen that don't necessarily warrant a, say, full or quick episode on them. But thanks again, guys. Until next crime.